The American media totally ignored this stuff until Donald Trump and I started talking about cat memes. If I have to, create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do.
If I have to create stories so that the American media actually has to pay attention to the suffering of American people, that's what I'm going to do. Okay, James David, let's talk about suffering. Since you and Donald Trump's now admitted lie, Ohio's governor has ordered extra state trooper patrols of Springfield schools because there have been multiple bomb threats called in to Springfield City Hall and to local hospitals and schools, forcing the latter to close. The right-wing Proud Boys, you know, the ones who helped attack the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, 2021, and whose leader is serving a 22-year prison sentence for insurrection, have marched through Springfield like the KKK of old. And Haitian residents are afraid to leave their homes due to shooting threats. Perhaps the biggest threat of all, Donald Trump is threatening to come to Springfield to hold one of his low-energy, light attendance hate rallies. And thus, the junior senator from Ohio becomes the first senator in the history of the United States and the first candidate for vice president ever to admit to putting people in his own state at risk of their lives and terrorizing them on purpose, just to force the mainstream media to discuss immigration on his cynical, white nationalism-boosting terms. Unsurprisingly, there are now calls for Vance to resign from the Senate due to the suffering his now admitted lie has unleashed in Springfield. Ohio State Representative Casey Weinstein tweeted after that now infamous CNN interview, quote, in the wake of J.D. Vance admitting he created the pet eating story, and as a result of the very real threats the communities and people he has targeted are now under, I am calling on him to resign as our senator. A timely reminder that Vance had his Senate seat purchased for him in 2022 for $15 million by a racist, woman-hating hedge fund billionaire named Peter Thiel, who has been Vance's only employer his whole life. And that Vance ran for Senate asking this really weird question in his most prolific TV ad.
Are you a racist?
Well, I guess JD decided to answer that question himself 2 years later with a resounding yes, by admitting that despite being paid by the voters of Ohio to represent, protect, and defend them, all of them, regardless of race, color, or immigration status, he instead unleashed what amounts to a terrorist campaign on his own constituents by amplifying hideous lies about black immigrants who were invited to become desperately needed workers in Springfield. Lies that started with ugly rumors about Haitian immigrants spread by literal neo-Nazis, which got amplified when a Facebook post that the poster now admits was a misunderstood story about her neighbor went viral and melded with an arrest more than 100 miles from Springfield of a clearly troubled black American woman for harming a cat, which then became what Vance himself has now labeled a meme that he felt free to amplify to stoke racism against Haitian immigrants for no other reason than to make the media cover immigration his way. That is who Donald Trump, with his own long history of racism, put on his ticket to be one step away from the nuclear codes. And despite all the condemnation, they are still doing it. Why? Because it's a strategy. Here's Donald Trump telling you that he doesn't care that James David's admitted lies stoked literal terrorism in Springfield and doubling down on the lies.
Did you denounce the bomb threats in Springfield, Ohio?
I don't know what happened with the bomb threats. I know that it's been taken over by illegal migrants, and that's a terrible thing that happened. Springfield was this beautiful town, and now they're going through hell. It's a sad thing.
So there's a term that you might not have heard before, but will unfortunately probably hear me use again, that describes what J.D. Vance and Donald Trump and their right-wing friends like Christopher Rufo and Stephen Miller are doing. It's stochastic terrorism. Stochastic terrorism is when the public demonization of a person or group of people through ideologically driven hate speech increases the likelihood that those people will be violently attacked and targeted because of those vicious claims. It's when attacks on drag queens claiming that they are grooming and sexualizing children lead to drag shows being canceled because of bomb threats. It's the right's demonization of Speaker Nancy Pelosi that leads to a deranged man breaking into her San Francisco home, searching for her so he can, quote, put her on trial, and instead bashing her husband's head in. And of course, it's what J.D. Vance has done to Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio. There's also a second term you need to know to understand what these people are doing. And I promise you, I'm not making it up. It's called dead catting. Making a shocking, dramatic, and usually false claim to distract from a more damaging story. It's like if a comedian threw a dead cat onto the stage to divert attention from the fact that he's bombing. And it's a technique often used by autocrats and failing leaders. Think Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines, elected in 2016 like Donald Trump, who called on police and even private citizens to kill anyone involved in the drug trade, while he was bilking his country financially by corruptly steering government contracts to his friends and cronies. Rodrigo Duterte left office in 2022, a year after Trump got run out of Washington, and he's currently fighting to stay out of prison over the corruption and to avoid the International Criminal Court over the drug war killings. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance would very much like you to stop talking and thinking about his constant sliming of childless cat ladies that include women like Taylor Swift and some in her army of fans, many of whom are of voting age. He would like us to stop talking about his party's religious fanaticism and their determination to ban abortion nationwide using the tactics written down in Project 2025. They fear that they will lose the election in 50 days because women are so disgusted by James David Vance and Donald Trump that they won't vote for them. So what better dead cat to throw onto the middle of the stage than forcing the media to instead focus on Haitian immigrants, who JD and Trump are demonizing as unhuman beasts lurking outside your door waiting to steal your cats and dogs so they can eat them. Did I mention that JD blurbed a book by the Pizzagate conspiracy promoter and right-wing lunatic Jack Posobiec that's titled Unhumans? What better way to replace the embarrassing memes about JD's cat lady fixation and his weird possible amorous relationship with couches than to get Americans to instead post memes about Haitians eating the dogs and cats? Those are the things they want talked about, not the Republican Party's systematic hatred of women who won't stay home and churn homemade butter for their husbands and vote for the rapist and his weird friend instead of normal middle-class Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. They would much rather lie about Haitians and turn them into hate objects. And if those lies cause some Trump and Vance ignorant MAGA devotees, including the neo-Nazis who started the hate toward Haitian immigrants in Springfield in the first place, to target them, terrorize them, and I don't know, maybe even kill some of them, and maybe hurt some other innocent people in Springfield, Ohio, who are not Haitian immigrants, but just like them are just living their lives, going to work or school and minding their business, well, so be it. James David says it's worth it. It's what he's got to do to force the mainstream media to join Fox and Newsmax and other right-wing outlets and podcasts in negatively fixating on immigrants. So Trump can casually announce that if he becomes president again, he will conduct a bloody mass deportation unlike anything anyone has ever seen before. And guess where Trump now says he's going to start the bloody mass deportations? Springfield, of course. All of this as Trump faces his second brush with death via a gunman shooting at him in Palm Beach, Florida, just as happened in Pennsylvania, neither of whom were Haitian or any kind of immigrant, both of whom are white, American, Trump-supporting men with guns. Joining me now is David Rothkopf, columnist for the Daily Beast and host of the Deep State Radio podcast. David, it's so good to see you. I wrote this piece and was very angry on the plane, and then I saw your piece that you'd written on your Substack, which I subscribe to. So I knew you were the right person to talk to. This thing that J.D. Vance has now admitted that he did is so ugly and awful. I wish that, the Haitian community could file a class action lawsuit against him. But it's clear that he's doing it to force us to talk about immigration, not abortion. Your thoughts?
Well, I think, they have used violence as a tactic since the very moment Trump entered the stage, right? He's defended or promoted violence in Charlottesville. He defended and promoted violence during the BLM demonstrations in 2020. We saw it happen on January 6th. And the reason he does it is it sends a message. It says America is chaotic and you need a strong man to step in. And as strong men have used in the past, dictators, wannabe dictators have done in the past, they use this to say, you must give me extraordinary powers. And I think one of the things that was most chilling to me was over the weekend, there were pamphlets being distributed in Springfield, Ohio, that literally used the exact same typeface as the Nazi pamphlets that were handed out in the 30s, used the same words, referred to Haitians in the same way Hitler referred to Jews as filth. This is a Hitlerian tactic. Now, complicating this whole matter, you provided us with some good vocabulary words here. Complementing this whole matter, there's another one that people should keep in mind, and that's hybrid warfare. Because one of the people who is supporting all of this is Vladimir Putin. We know, we've seen what the DOJ has done with them, and they amplify these messages. They amplify the messages because they think it weakens the US. They amplify the messages because only if Trump wins can Putin win in Ukraine. So you've got Hitler tactics and you've got Putin tactics together as the kind of last gasp, I hope, of this MAGA movement. But, I think it poses a real risk that the next 6, 7, 8 weeks, and possibly the weeks after the election, could be much more violent than anything we've seen thus far.